So yesterday at the excellent Women and Climate Change session, I was offered another truth and correction moment. A community organizer from northern Kenya said to me that in the opening plenary, when I had celebrated the successes of women in the last 12 months, that I was celebrating drops in the ocean. And she said that rural women, like those in her community, were still waiting for inclusion in decision-making. And she's right. And it made me reflect that proximity cannot just be a theme for this year's Skoll World Forum. It must remain a guiding principle for every year of this work. Proximity is going to be a journey, and we have only just begun. But I offer no apology for celebrating drops in the ocean, particularly when those drops are as beautiful and inspiring as Agnes herself, and I think we're going to see a picture of her. So if she's here, thank you, Agnes, for the opportunity for some truth and correction and to focus our minds on the work still to be achieved. And on that note, our next speaker is on a mission to develop the African leaders of the future. He wants to create the next generation of ethical and entrepreneurial Africans, those that can build their own organizations and then contribute and build their own countries. Fred Swaniker was born in Ghana, but he has lived and worked in over 10 African countries. He's been already recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. And he's here today to tell us about his plans for the African Leadership University. And I should also mention that he is a Libra. Please welcome Fred.
By the end of this century, 40% of the world's population will be African. But even more alarming to me is the fact that by 2035, just 17 years from now, Africa will have the largest workforce in the world. 1 billion people, larger than China's and larger than India's workforce. Now, 17 years seems very far away, but we're here today to talk about the proximate future, what's happening just around the corner. So let me put those 17 years for you in another way. We have 6,205 days until we reach the largest workforce in the world. And since January, that number has already dropped. 6,205 days is the number of days we had at the beginning of the year. We're now sitting at 6,105 days. And tomorrow, we'll have 6,104. The clock is ticking. Imagine all those people without education, infrastructure, healthcare, jobs, food, and security. We're sitting at the cusp of a global humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale. We cannot build enough walls, Mr. Trump, to stop 40% of the world's population from seeking better opportunities elsewhere. They're coming. They will be very proximate. So we're in real trouble. Or are we? Could this looming population boom also be one of the greatest sources of global prosperity that will define this century? Because amongst this next billion is the next Elon Musk. Yes, the founder of SpaceX, the company that you just heard of, is an African. Although you couldn't tell it because he's now got this very fancy American accent. But he left South Africa when he was 17 to move to Canada, and he began this journey that we all heard about just now. Or the next Dr. Olenu, the Ghanaian scientist from NASA, who led the team that designed the Mars rover robot that went to the Red Planet. What's up with all these Africans and Mars? Or the next Spencer Horn, a young South African who graduated from one of my institutions, the African Leadership Academy, and is now building airships to transport cargo across Africa. Or the next Belinda Munemo, another graduate from the African Leadership Academy, who's building a chain of schools, already educating 500 children, and employs 60 people. And she's only 28. The next, Graça Machel, who was on the stage a few years ago and received an award as one of the global icons, treasures as they call them. The next, Kofi Annan. The next, Nelson Mandela. The next, Desmond Tutu. The next, Dr. Chris Barnard, the South African who did the first heart transplant. Yes, today you can get a heart transplant because of a South African. The next, Danai Gurira, my college classmate, who just recently wowed audiences in the global blockbuster movie Black Panther. Or her co-star, Lupita Nyong'o, Oscar winner. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, globally renowned author. The next, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Oscar-nominated actor. The next, Clive Calder, the South African musical genius who discovered Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, NSYNC, and A Tribe Called Quest, and so many other global entertainers that, can I get some water? Here's water. That provide the soundtrack to our lives. Or the next, Wangari Maathai, Nobel Prize-winning environmentalist. The point is this: Africa has some of the world's top talent. It just needs to be unlocked. The average age of an African is 19.5, whereas the average age of a German or a Japanese is 46. So with this youthful energy, could therefore unleash a massive source of innovation and prosperity, not just for Africa, but for the entire world, as we've just heard from what Gwen shared about what another young African has built with SpaceX. Now, what will determine the future between the first doomsday scenario I painted and this much more exciting alternative is one thing: education. The quest for an alternative global future has been driving me and my colleagues at the African Leadership Group for the last 14 years. We are on a mission to unlock Africa's treasure trove of talent before it is too late. We first started doing this with a high school in South Africa called the African Leadership Academy, where we'd select the most outstanding young people from every country in Africa, develop them as leaders and entrepreneurs, and then send them off to top universities around the world. But after several years of sending them off to universities in the US, and after seeing the tremendous need for education in Africa, we thought we needed to scale this up and to do it at the university level. But to launch any university with decent quality takes about maybe 300 years, right? And it takes billions of dollars and thousands of professors. The only problem is we don't have 300 years. We have 6,000 days. We don't have billions of dollars. We have almost no money. We also don't have hundreds of thousands of qualified professors. So this task is as impossible as it must have seemed in 1961, when US President John F. Kennedy set the goal of putting a man on the moon in less than 10 years.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Or as impossible as it seemed when Gwen and Elon Musk set out on their journey to start SpaceX and to put people on Mars. So educating hundreds of millions of Africans in just 6,000 days amounts to nothing short of a moonshot for education. A moonshot has three characteristics. First, the problem needs to be so large that solving it seems impossible. Second, the problem must require a radical approach. You have to start over. You can't use conventional methods. You need completely unconventional methods. And third, the approach must depend on some breakthrough in technology. So today, I want to share with you the unconventional radical approach that I believe we need in order to solve the global challenge at hand. First is I believe that the learning system that we need must depend not on having phenomenal teachers, but on fantastic students. I learned this from an experiment that we did at the African Leadership Academy. We were teaching a class, a computer science class, but it wasn't going so well. So we decided after a while to scrap the class. But the students came to us and said, you know, we really want to do computer science. So we said, well, what do you want us to do? We don't have a teacher. But we decided to do an experiment. We said, we'll have you take an online class. But we didn't believe that online classes alone would be as powerful because people drop out and so forth. Learning is a social activity at the end of the day. So we said, okay, you come together, but you have to take this class as a team. So these students would get together 3 times a week, and they'd watch these lectures. And then when they got to a point where they were confused, they would pause it. And the ones who understood what was going on would explain to the others that didn't. And soon, these students were learning how to code without a single teacher in the classroom. So 6 months into the school year, I was sitting with one of the students at the academy, and I said, what are your favorite classes this year? And she says, my computer science class. I said, how is that possible? There's no teacher in the class. She says, yes, I'm learning more from that class and enjoying than any of our classes. So I said, how did you rate the class last year with the teacher? 6 out of 10. How did you rate the class this year without a teacher? 9.5 out of 10. That blew me away. We were able to offer a better class at 0 cost. And this girl graduated from the academy, went to Stanford to do computer science. Indeed. So I realized I'd been thinking about the problem the wrong way. Instead of designing a system around a scarce resource, teachers, we need to design the system around an abundant resource, which is students, and let them learn by themselves using technology that exists today. They have access to all the information in the world now. And let them teach each other in peers. Haven't you noticed that every time you have to explain something to someone else, it makes you learn it a lot better yourself? And so that was the big insight that I got, that you have to design this system around students, an abundant resource, and not a scarce resource. The second thing that I believe this learning system must have is that its aim, its ultimate purpose, should not be to teach students facts and figures, but rather to teach them how to think and how to solve problems, to create problem solvers. How many of you think back to your college days? Think back to what you actually studied in college. Just take a moment to think about what you studied in college, if you remember. Now, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you are actually doing something today that is exactly related to what you studied in college? See about maybe 15, 20 people. It's never more than 10% whenever I ask this question in the audience. So we need to rather be teaching people how to solve problems. Because when you become problem solvers, critical thinkers, and not facts and figures, you can then come up with innovative solutions. And then you can become entrepreneurs who will create the jobs for this 1 billion that we need. So one of the things we really believe is that the education of the future is not about facts and figures, especially when we think about what's happening with artificial intelligence and automation. A lot of things that we learn quickly become forgotten and will be done by machines. So we need to learn how to solve problems above everything else and to apply those in entrepreneurial ways to then create the jobs that this billion will need. And finally, this education model must cost close to 0 because we don't have any money in Africa. So let me show you an example of this educational model at work.
Arduino is is a microcontroller. So what that means is it's this tiny computer that we can use to make it do anything for us in the real world. So for instance, I could take a bulb, connect it to my Arduino, connect that Arduino gadget to my computer, and then write code on the computer and tell my bulb, please light 1 time every 3 seconds. My bulb will now be lighting, dip, 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 and that's a functionality that you would not be able to get if you had just a battery and a bulb. But with an Arduino, you're able to now control things. You're able to control the physical world using code, which is pretty cool.
Arduino was first introduced to us in the third week of school. However, it was like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and I hadn't felt like I had done something significant. And so I went to my facilitator, Zino, and I told him I want to build something. I want to do something with what I'm learning. He mentioned we have a drone that uses Arduino, and he's like, I can assemble it and then fly it. And I was like, okay, yeah.
So Wango is my friend, and she knows I have this thing for programming, and I equally like Arduino. And so she came up to me and she said, Kathy, I have this quadcopter that we can program and tell to do things. You know, we can teach it how to do many things. And so that completely fascinated me, and I was on board from the moment she told me. So we found ourselves in a room, you know, fixing up everything and reading from a book, instructions back to back.
We had to assemble the drone. So it came in pieces, lots and lots of pieces. And then there are many parts, and we had to put the parts together. So there were like motors for the copter, and then it has a control board, which they call the flight board. And then what you connect to that is the Arduino, which you now connect to the computer so you can code.
Well, the fact that there was nothing, it was just a flow of pieces, and now you're able to bring it together and you see it fly. You know, something you created is now flying.
There's that relief, yeah. You feel like, yes, after all this we've gone through, we've actually made it work.
By doing this, the one thing for me personally that I gained was confidence. You know, to hear that you built a quadcopter and you assembled microcontrollers, it sounds crazy, but then once you do it and once you're able to understand how the process goes, it automatically builds your confidence, and you're like, wait a minute. So this is what they're usually talking about. It's not that big of a deal, and it's not that hard at all. Anyone could do it.
I shared with you the 3 principles that I believe this education that we need to rapidly scale up people in Africa is going to need. First, it must be student-centered. You saw how that worked. That the faculty were not the ones telling the students how to build that drone. Their own initiative, their own energy, their own grit, that's what they used. And this comes from a culture. And the nice thing about culture is that it's free. The second thing, we said it's about solving problems. If that isn't problem solving, figuring out how to build one of the most sophisticated technologies by themselves. Third, I said it needs to cost close to zero. So that education that you saw, and I can tell you that those girls can compete with the best in the world, costs today as little as $500 per year. It doesn't cost $60,000 like it costs to go to MIT or Stanford and so forth. $500 a year. And we're on a journey to take that cost down to zero, which by this September we hope to have done. And you might be wondering, and our plans are to scale this to educate 1 million youth at a time. So we can create several million before the 6,000 days are over. Yet, we don't need any donor funding to do this. You might be wondering, how is this possible? We figured out a model where we raise funds from investors to finance the student's education. It's called an income share arrangement. And when the student graduates, they pay back a share of their income back to the investors. So what this means is that we're not saddling our students with debt. We're investing in them. And if they're successful and they get a job, then they pay a share of their income. If they're unemployed, then there's nothing for them to pay. Every now and then, you'll get an Elon Musk, and you get a share of the income. And that's how we're financing the system. So in conclusion, today we meet at Oxford, one of the most incredible universities in the world. It opened its doors 1,000 years ago, 1096. Since then, billions of dollars have been spent to produce hundreds of thousands of graduates. Today, it costs $50,000 to go to Oxford. So to go for a 3-year degree here would be $150,000. So if we were to educate just 10 million, let's just pick 10 million Africans, using Oxford's model, it would cost us $1.5 trillion and take 1,000 years, which we don't have. We have 6,000 days. And we've shown that by thinking differently, we can get Africans an Oxford quality education for almost zero upfront cost from the student in a sustainable, market-based way. The problem can be cracked, but we don't have time. We need radical, unconventional solutions like this, and we need to do this at the primary school level, at the secondary school level, at vocational schools. They've got to focus on being student-driven, making sure that people are becoming problem solvers and entrepreneurs, and extremely low cost. We also need entire new categories of skill development that don't even fit in a box today. For example, should we even be using the term universities? Should we maybe be creating a new category of learning systems, like a skills accelerator or a leadership accelerator, that give people an initial dose of learning in maybe 6 to 12 months, get them straight out into work, and then work with them through lifelong learning and give them doses of education and skills just in time as they need it. Right now, we have just-in-case education. We teach you all these facts and figures just in case they become useful. This reminds me of a time when we had 17 years to solve another problem in Africa. It was in 2001, and at that time, less than 2 million people in Africa had access to telephone lines. And when they did, the lines were horribly, of terrible quality and ridiculously expensive. But then the mobile phone came along. Africa quickly abandoned any plans to build landlines. And today, just 17 years later, over 500 million people have access to telephones. And a Maasai woman can make a telephone call to her cousin in New York with incredible clarity for very low cost. We need to apply that same thinking today in order to unlock Africa's immense talent. We need a moonshot for education in Africa. Now, Quinn just shared about their plans to take humanity to Mars. And that's a wonderful vision. But you know, I'm not planning to go to Mars. When I travel in planes, I hate turbulence. So I can't imagine the turbulence of going to Mars. I intend to be here 6,000 days from now on the continent, on this planet. And so this mission to develop 1 billion people and to convert them into problem solvers, for me, it's not about helping Africa. It's not about saving Africa. It's about saving the world so that we don't have to go to Mars. It's about taking these 1 billion brains and converting them into a powerful energy of innovation, entrepreneurship, to drive global prosperity and to solve many of the problems that we're seeing in the world today. It reminds me of the movie Black Panther, where they talked about vibranium, this incredible energy source that's in Africa. It lies in our youth. And we have an incredible opportunity to ensure that the next 6,000 days is an era of unprecedented prosperity and innovation so that we don't all have to go to Mars. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, there it is.
This is such an important message, and how wonderful that you're delivering it here in Oxford, as you say, the home of one of our elitist organizations, educational organizations. Absolutely loved everything that you had to say, and I have to ask, are you going to be able to devote a sliver of your time to helping Western, countries to realize that they shouldn't just let you leapfrog us, but actually we need to really question the way we're running education and universities in our countries too? Have you been approached by people asking?
Well, I mean, I think that's the whole point of this, is that many of the solutions to the world's problems actually lie in Africa. Yeah. And what we've come up with is a global innovation in education. It's not just an African innovation. I mean, if we can produce people who can compete with the best in the world for almost zero cost, this is an innovation. I mean, how many of you are paying tuition for your students, right, for your children right now? 60,000, hundreds of thousands, exactly, goodness gracious, right? Yeah. So yes, this is something that we think needs to go global. Just like when the mobile phone was invented in Africa, most of the innovations that we see in mobile technology today came out of Africa. For example, pay as you go, or mobile money, Apple Pay, all those things that we're using now, it was first done in Africa with M-Pesa. So I think that, and if we think about climate change, Elon Musk, yes, he's a great innovator, but there's thousands of them on the continent. They're just waiting for an opportunity to be converted.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
I have to just quickly ask you about your own experience, because you went to college in Minnesota, and I wonder what that was like. It must have been really cold.
It was, McAllister.
And maybe there weren't too many other Ghanaians there. I'm just wondering, was this the beginning of this journey? Was that in an experience where you were thinking, what the heck am I doing here?
Well, I loved my time. I was at McAllister College in Minnesota. It was a fantastic place to go. Any McAllister people? But, I was one of there were many other talented young people that I left behind when I had the opportunity to go to McAllister. So one of the things that I vowed when I went there was that I would one day create an opportunity for millions of young people to be able to get that.
Well, we believe in you. Amazing. Thank you so much, Fred.